driver communicates with the device drivers. The device drivers in this instance do not directly perform the communication with some end device. In the case of the BACnet proxy, the networking requirements of BACnet specify that there should be a one-to-many relationship here. So rather than a one-to-one here, we instead have our device driver communication forwarded to a BACnet proxy, and the proxy itself does the device communication. So that's the high-level overview. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to interrupt me, by the way. Just to, this part is a little atypical if you're not used to it. So, if you have any questions, please do speak up. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is that this is the model that the Ecobee driver will use, and I'll get more into that in just a bit. So if you haven't seen it, this is Ecobee's web portal if you're signed into your own Ecobee. This one happens to be one available at the lab's IoT lab. I'm not going to display any of the actual important data, but I want you to have seen this for a couple of reasons. The main reason, the two main reasons are that some of the data you will need can be found under this icon here. That will specify your device's serial number, or in the driver configuration, that'll be the device ID. And then something you'll have to work with also is the API key can be found under the developer tab, and you will have to do an authentication step under the My Apps tab. And I will elaborate a little bit more on all of these things later. I just wanted you to be familiar with where those are located. So let me bring up my remote here. Sorry for the delay. Okay. So the Ecobee driver is a driver for driving those Ecobee thermostats. So in the case of the lab, we have a couple of these deployed at our lab homes, but they're a publicly available product, so-called smart thermostat. And the way that they work is they collect data and then they make it available via web API. So the driver is built to interface with the master driver, and then we will have what Shweta alluded to as the HTTP proxy agent, which is the proxy. So like every other driver, we have a driver configuration. It specifies some of the sort of default things, so time zone, interval, registry configuration. The driver type I want to specifically hit on, it must be Ecobee. That is used to find the driver's module under the master driver. So if this is not exactly this, it will fail to find that module. The interval is defaulted to this value, mainly because that's the actual update frequency of Ecobee data. You can set it to whatever you might like, but if you set it to be more frequent than this, you will get essentially duplicate data. So, and then here's the driver configuration. I'm gonna actually go to this one. So there's a couple of tokens that are provided by Ecobee. There's an authorization code, a PIN, and these are all used by Ecobee for auth. The ones that you will need to start the driver working is you will have to have your API key, and you will have to have a device ID. The PIN and authorization code are obtained by the driver when it starts up, and the the access token and refresh token are obtained after that. Um, so uh, there's a couple of things that are important to note about that. Ecobee sort of requires you to manually add some of this authentication. So you know, let's say you supply your API key, your device ID, um, and all the rest of your configuration is correct. You start up the master driver, and then this driver will start. At that point in time, it will go out and fetch an auth code and PIN. In order to authorize the auth code, you will have to put in the PIN to the My Apps section that I showed earlier in the um, Ecobee web UI. So you click on that My Apps tab, it will bring up a list of applications that you've authorized. Might be your first one. You can click Add Application. It'll give you a little form for the PIN, and then it'll have you validate it. And at that point, the app will be the authorization code will be authenticated, and that can be used to fetch tokens. At that point, the driver will automatically go out and fetch your tokens. Some other things to note is that essentially everything but your API key will be refreshed with um, some frequency. I'm sorry, API key and auth code, as far as I remember. Um, so the access token and refresh token are refreshed by Ecobee's web API. The refresh token, I believe, is 1 hour. The access token is on 24-hour intervals. The driver should handle that for you. So you shouldn't have to worry about doing any of that manually. And actually, now that I think about it, I think the auth code is reset once a year. And that one you will have to do manually again because you will have to have a new PIN. Are there any questions about these? I'll look at chat here. Any questions? Okay. So the device ID, like I said earlier, that's going to be uh, your serial number. Um, Ecobee just does really long integers. Your group ID, this is sort of an arbitrary string. And the purpose of this is to essentially separate one user's collection of Ecobees from another's. And so, for example, if I have an Ecobee account with, say, 3 Ecobee thermostats for whatever reason, and maybe Shweta had an account with a couple of thermostats, I would have a different group ID than her, and that is used to track which Ecobees belong to which cached data. We have the proxy identity. Um, this will need to be whatever identity you've installed this proxy agent with. It's required for the JSON RPC calls. It's worth noting probably that this this can be specified however you want really. I will be changing the code for this agent to be renamed per some user requests. But in general, just know that when you install this agent, you can specify this identity, and it needs to be correctly specified in this configuration file. And then finally, um, this is the config name that you store this configuration in the config store. This is used to make sure that these auth tokens are being updated. So you will want to make sure that this is exact. If you don't get this right, like let's say I install this as devices PNNL ISP1 Ecobee1, when it goes to update this configuration file with the more updated tokens, it will just fail. Or it won't fail, it'll create a new configuration. the old configuration will fail, and the new configuration will like start itself. And then subsequently that will fail because again, this is going to be the wrong value. So um, yeah, so that's the device configuration. You'll need one of these per Ecobee. Um, and yeah, I will show going through the installation process in a little bit, but I also want to cover the registry configuration. Just like other devices, uh, the registry configuration in the config store is specified by this path here. So when you store this in the config store, you'll want to make sure to use anything that comes after the double slash here.
James,
Uh,
I got a
yeah.
quick question. So, where you have the config name devices PNL ISP1 Ecobee,
Hmm.
um, is where this configuration needs to be stored in the
Yes.
config store?
Yes.
Okay, that I thought that's what you said, but I wanted to make sure that that's what you were saying. Okay,
Sure. No problem. All right, so the registry configuration. This is sort of similar to most other registry configurations. There are a couple little oddities just due to the way that Ecobee requests work. So we have the typical point name, Voltron point name, units, type, writable, and then some other things, notes, default value, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have our list of Ecobee points. So the oddity here is this readable one. So um, if you are using, maybe you have a control agent for your Ecobees. So you'll be setting set points via these cool hold and heat hold temperatures. However, when the request, when the device sensor data comes back, those are not in the sensor data. What's actually in the sensor data are the desired heat, desired cool, and the actual temperature. So in this case, I set the readable to false here, as those will not be included in scrapes. And then because you wouldn't actually set these values, these are writable false, but readable true. So again, that's just an oddity of the way Ecobee requests work. Um, and so the Ecobee driver supports um, two of the objects that Ecobee provides. Those are the settings values and hold values. So these are kind of like registers would be on, say, a Modbus device, or at least that's sort of how the master driver views them. Um, Really, they're just values provided in the JSON blob by Ecobee, but this sort of you know keeps this consistent with the design of drivers and the master driver agent. So there are two other kinds of three other kinds of register, quote unquote registers that are not included in the registry configuration, and that's because they're essentially static in the Ecobee data. So those are status, uh, program, and vacation. So if you look at the Ecobee documentation, I can pull that up. Uh, if you go in here, there's these object definitions. So you can learn more about how the programs and vacations work in here. I don't really have time to go into much detail about their construction, um, but there are quote unquote registers for setting and reading those values, as well as just getting the status, which is sort of a read-only value that it provides. Um, so taking a look at the uh, README, that's the proxy README. So we have these configuration files, and then we're going to install them like you would any other typical driver, assuming that you've gone through the process of bootstrapping the platform. Can start up the platform if you haven't already. Make sure your environment is activated. This assumes that you have a proxy agent installed. I'll talk about that as well. But you'll start this proxy agent, install a master driver. You can use whatever master driver configuration file you want. I'm going to demonstrate just the example one. We will use the config store to store the driver config and registry configuration, and then we can start the master driver. So to see what that looks like here, this is what a publish would look like on an Ecobee that um, has been successfully configured and that pin has been put in. I'm going to go through the steps to install and config, or to install the driver. I am not going to actually run it because again, there's some sensitive auth that is sort of managed by the user. And this is an actual lab device, so I don't want to expose the updated auth. But so your data here will consist of your programs, and this corresponds to uh, a program in the Ecobee object definitions. They're pretty big, and you can get kind of silly with them. So like someone has set up a program to last till 2035 on this device for some reason. And then there's a status. Apparently, the status on this device is not being updated. Actually, that makes sense. So status is a collection of active, essentially active HVAC components. And this device is not actually controlling any HVAC components. That said, you can still create programs and vacations, and it will still collect sensor data. So um, then there's this vacations object. You can specify like a start and end date, then your desired heat and cool ranges, that sort of thing. And then down here we have some example data, and then the device metadata. So if we want to,
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it possible? So I have an Ecobee at my house and use it so my son's room is the source at night. And is it possible to somehow link Voltron to some like zone damper and use this API, or what would be the end goal of using Voltron when they already have an API or have a web interface?
So there's two main reasons here. If you're already using Voltron, then it's easy to set up data collection. So that happens to be the use case that the project that had me develop this driver is using it for, is mainly currently for data collection. Because then this data will be published to the bus, and then if you have a historian installed, you can store it that way. The other thing is that for control algorithms, right? So the lab is developing services like market services and transactive controls, that sort of thing. Granted, this is really a sort of a home gamer device, but if you have some control algorithm for a home, or if you're a utility looking for data on that home's uh, maybe correlating that home's settings to energy usage or something.
Yeah, sorry to break in, but it provides a single point of contact that can be kind of an integration point for different devices in the home. But yeah, but if you have an Ecobee that you're just using for your house, then just go through the Ecobee API or go through the Ecobee interface. And then this also collects some more points as well. So it depends on your use case whether or not you want to use this this driver.
Yeah, I would suspect that, in the case of individuals, I think this is unlikely to be terribly useful, but, for the connected homes project that has, several of these, and they're using them for control algorithms, it becomes a lot more useful.
Yeah, yeah, especially with control algorithms that are already written to be general and not just work with Ecobees, but work with other thermostats and work in Voltron to communicate with a bunch of different devices.
Does that adequately answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. So let's make sure we don't have a platform running, which we do. So I'll go through the everything except for really bootstrapping here. So start up the platform. I recommend using this command. I saw that one of the community members was having stability problems with the Voltron sort of typical command, the Voltron-VV-L sort of thing. I've was able to reproduce that issue, but I haven't been able to reproduce an issue with this particular command, assuming your environment is set up correctly. So we have the platform set up. We can list our status. I'm going to remove these just so I can go through the process of configuring all of this. So I'm going to install a listener agent again, just so you can see me doing it. Not really much configuration needed for this. If you're using this a lot and you're waiting for data publishes, the period can be a bit much. So maybe adjusting that to something more reasonable. I find that 5 seconds is just a little bit too often, but that's more of a specific use case question. So the next thing we'll need to do is install this HTTP proxy. So this agent also doesn't require any configuration. And this agent is sort of driver agnostic. So any driver should be able to send a request to this agent for remote HTTP data requests. It supports currently get and post. And there's going to be a couple of changes to the current implementation of this. The core ideas will stay the same, but breaking up the data request into individual get post endpoints, that sort of thing. In any case, what this agent will do is you send a JSON RPC request to this for remote API data. You provide the URL you're searching for, whatever parameters you need. And then this agent, if you do not have data or the data that you have is older than the period, than the update period. So like, let's say I had a timestamp for March 26th and my update interval was 60 seconds. My data would be out of date. So this agent would go get new data from the remote. It stores it as a JSON blob to be fetched later. It includes that timestamp, and then it will return the JSON blob to the end driver. If the data is within the update frequency, so if I had data from March 27th at 11:30 and my update interval is 5 minutes, then my data is still current. So it will return the stored JSON data. The JSON RPC request includes an interval in seconds, and that's how it's deciding what the update interval is. That helps keep this driver agnostic. So you don't have to do a ton of configuration of this agent. You just say, this is my update interval and this is where my data is. And then it does the caching for you. So in the case of the Ecobee driver, the driver sends the URL to the Ecobee API, and it sends some request information like what settings to change, what functions to change, program objects, that sort of thing. I think I misspoke there. Sorry. It should just resend in the case of getting data, it should just send the auth information. Sorry for the confusion there. Yeah, those are two different concepts. So this is really just for fetching data. In the case of the Ecobee driver, if you install it with some periodic pull frequency, it will pull for that frequency using this agent. Getting or setting values rather is just done through the driver itself because there's no sort of data update frequency there. It's just you're sending a control command. And so yeah, the main purpose of this agent is to essentially prevent yourself from over querying some API endpoint. So some APIs have you can submit so many requests a day or a second or that sort of thing. And this helps you be safe from maybe overcharging yourself or from sort of locking yourself out of your account. So that's that. We can then install a master driver. It's very much a similar process. And I've closed my window. Sweet. So I'm going to just use the master driver configuration and examples. That's maybe a good starting point, but very likely not what you're going to want to use in an actual deployment. Okay, and then so the master driver or the driver framework in general uses this concept of the config store to deal with storing and updating device configurations. So we're going to use that to manipulate the Ecobee driver configurations. We can use vctl config list and then the name of the identity of the master driver, so platform.driver. And this will display any configurations currently stored for the master driver. I removed them earlier for the purposes of the demonstration, but just it's a very useful command. To store, we can use config store. Then we want to specify again the platform.driver if we're storing for the master driver agent. And then, so first we're going to do the driver config. Again, so what I'm going to put here next is the sort of path that this will be referred to in the config store. So like I was saying before, that should match this exactly. And then we give it the path to the configuration. And And so since device configurations are JSON, that's sort of the default. We don't have to include this last portion. I'm going to just for the sake of demonstrating it, but you can exclude it, and that's totally fine. So if we do our list command again, should see that that's been stored in the config store under that path that I specified. So now we want to do the registry configuration. And so the path here is, again, the one that comes after the this portion. So the registry configuration path. So mine will be ecobee.csv. Then we'll specify where that configuration can be loaded from. And for CSV files, you do need to include this extra option specifying it to CSV. Then we can list again. Okay, so at this point, we can start our proxy and listener agent, and then once those are going, start the master driver. That will start the driver process when it goes through the configuration. When the driver process begins, like I said, like I was alluding to earlier, you will have to deal with entering this pin code into the web UI. So you'll see something that looks like this in the logs. I'm not going to show this portion of my logs. Again, it's devices that are actually being used, but you'll see these sort of double star lines, and then this line about authorizing your pin code. So you'll go enter the 4-digit value here in the web UI, and that will authorize your authorization code, and then it will wait this 60-second period, and then it will fetch the rest of your auth itself. And then if you wait for the next master driver scrape, you'll see that this data comes through. And this is an actual collection I did a little bit earlier this morning. Are there any questions about this? Or any questions about the Voltron driver framework?
So yeah, so this is an example of how you could tie into a different service and bring it into the Voltron platform. So Ecobee is the work example, but it could work for other systems, such as weather station. So ambient weather station is another one that's being worked on. Have we presented that at the?
We have
SARS?
not. I was anticipating that to take a little bit longer, honestly, so I could probably briefly go over the ambient agent.
No, we can save it for another one.
Okay.
What unit is the temperatures in?
That's a good question.
I assume Fahrenheit, but is that in the message anywhere?
It actually isn't, or I don't believe it's Fahrenheit. It's a
Oh, is it?
pretty large, numeric value.
It's just missing the decimal point.
Is
So
it? Okay.
it is based on what you've set, but they don't. But whatever you set, so whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, but it comes out without a decimal point, so you just shift one decimal point.
And is it, so you have to set it Fahrenheit or Celsius, but is it in the message anywhere what it's set at?
Not that I have seen.
Okay. Well, and so Jamie Cole is on that Connected Homes project and has done a lot of IoT and installations and that sort of thing. And I don't know, Jamie, we don't have to go into exhaustive detail, but maybe just mention some of the things we've learned about Ecobee, and not to,
Yeah, all the positive stuff, right?
Well, all the positive stuff and just things to be aware of, right? So it's a consumer. It's meant for a consumer to work in their home.
And so there is some limitations in resolution, and I think that one of the big things with a lot of consumer products, it is no fault of Ecobee at all. Most consumer products, the timestamps and the resolution in which they collect data can be unusual because you can pull data regularly, more frequently than what they update, and they don't necessarily tell you this is fresh data. So you can pull it every 10 seconds or a minute or whatever you choose, but if the data only updates every 30 seconds to a minute, you're not going to get any new values. One of the other things, with APIs, most of you I'm sure have had some experience with APIs, a lot of them limit the number of times you can query. And so if you query too many times, it ends up costing you financially. So that's something else to be aware of. As far as Ecobee goes, they're very they're very good at being able to contact their support. It's a small company, even though they sell a lot of products, and they're willing to work with you as far as developing these systems and getting your feedback. So that's been nice, but many of these companies, it's very difficult to get anything better than 5-minute resolution data out of. So I think that's the biggest thing to be aware of. Other things are understanding the data that you're getting, because they'll have different tags on the data that you're getting via the API than they actually name it in even the user manual. So, kind of having to understand what data sets and what points are which can be a little confusing. So just whenever you're working with an API, it's not a bad idea to reach out to somebody, especially if you have clout like we have at a national lab. It's nice because they're quick to respond usually, and then getting definitions of things in the manual versus what the variable name is in the API. But otherwise, it's very useful. Thanks to James for doing good work on this platform. I know it wasn't the easiest because of the many layers. I think that there may be one other caveat that I didn't mention, and that is that when you query Ecobee in particular, it's going to give you the data for all the thermostats on that account. So if you have more than one home, which probably isn't likely, but we have at the lab more than one thermostat, we actually get the data for all the thermostats at once. So there might be some additional labor costs in parsing all that data out. I think that's about it. Those are the big things.
Yeah, to kind of elaborate, or to sort of discuss for a moment the design of the Voltron implementation, the inclusion of multiple thermostats per account, and also the limits on their request, the amount of requests you can send to the API. That's sort of what the goal of developing that proxy agent was, is so that we don't, if we have drivers for 4 Ecobees but only one account, we're not sending 4 requests per per update or per polling frequency, right? We're only sending 1 request for all of the devices over 1 polling frequency, and then that's that that data gets cached by that proxy agent and then is given sort of this, distributed to the drivers as they request the data, and then the driver itself is responsible for parsing it out.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
All right. Well, thanks a lot for that demonstration and discussion. So if there's anybody has any questions or wants to talk about other devices or other potential drivers, let us know. If you want to hear more about practicalities of working with IoT devices, we can connect you up with Jamie for that. So, okay, with that, I'll open it up for any other questions or discussions of research. All right.
I just mentioned that ambient agent. I don't know, James, has that been incorporated into the master driver at this point?
So
or is it publicly available?
Ambient is going to be hopefully included in the 7.0 release. It actually is not a driver. The ambient agent implementation uses the Voltron base weather service, so it's a little bit different. And I'm, imagining that in the near future I'll probably go over that at one of these office hours. But it provides some additional sort of features, and it works a little bit differently.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, if there's no other questions, then we'll call it a meeting. If you have topics that you'd like to see covered in future office hours, please just let us know at voltron@pnnl.gov, and we're especially encourage folks to discuss the research they're doing. It's a great way to get comments back from the community, chances for collaboration, and helps us understand the use cases that people are using the platform for. So with that,
Yes.
go ahead.
One last thing, this is Shweta. We are planning to have a 7.0 release by the 31st. That's our plan. So we'll see how it goes.
So this will be the full release as opposed to the release candidate that's out there.
And some of the features which cannot make it to the 7.0 full release will be pushed to 7.1, which we're hoping to have a release in a couple of months out.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope everybody is staying well out there and adjusting. We're lucky that at least for a lot of us in this field, we're able to work remotely. So everybody stay safe, and we will see you again in a couple weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the presentation. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.